So those of you who are watching the recording, I forgot to record the first bit, so you're gonna miss out on the parish notices. But there we are. You're going to hear the real deal now, which is Roger Steward, author of Langemark and Reclaiming the Salient. And Roger, I'm going to pass it over to you now, my friend, and you're going to tell us about the new Ypres League. So you need to unmute yourself, and I need to pin you. And there we are.
Here we go.
Over to you.
Good evening, everybody.
Evening.
I presume everybody can hear me.
They can.
Yeah, fabulous. So for you guys who don't know me, as Paul has mentioned, my name is Roger Steward. I'm a battlefield tour guide. I live here in Ypres, in Zillebeke, just on the outskirts of Ypres. My wife is Flemish. This is how I ended up here. But I've lived here since about 2008. Been a battlefield tour guide here since 2010. I run my own tour guide business called Ypres Battlefield Tours. So maybe you guys may have seen me, black minibus with the orange lettering. So, you know, going around the salient. And also, as Paul mentioned, an author. So I've been lucky enough to write, you know, two books, which I really wanted to write for some time. The Studentens Friedhof to Soldaten Friedhof, you know, the history of Langemark German cemetery, and Reclaiming the Salient as well, which is proven to be, you know, a real popular, publication, if you will. But the reason I'm here tonight, and thank you, Paul, for inviting me on, is to kind of describe, go through with everybody an idea that myself and a few other like-minded individuals here in the Ypres Salient and back in the UK have come up with, which is reforming an iconic British organisation, which was very, very active here in Ypres in the 1920s up until the Second World War, called the Ypres League. Now, for you guys who don't know about the Ypres League, it's formed in 1920 by a Canadian, Henry Beckles-Wilson, Lieutenant Colonel. And the whole idea really of the League was to foster and to carry on this comradeship, which had developed amongst, you know, soldiers who had fought in the Ypres Salient. Now, membership of the League was only open at the time to either men who had fought in the Salient, or unfortunately the families of men who fell in the Salient. And of course, it had a huge range then in terms of membership. So when you start reading the Ypres Times, so the Ypres Times is the next stage, if you will, to the old Ypres Times. And the Ypres Times was produced by the Ypres League and was given out quarterly to its members. But they're quoting at some points 36,000 members. How much of that is accurate, we don't know. But it had a huge, huge membership. And it was really, really responsible for a lot of things that happened in Ypres in that period, which have really gone under the radar. We kind of all look at them today and nobody kind of understands how important the Ypres League was within this. So, for example, they're key in coming up with the idea of St. George's Memorial Church and for raising funds for St. George's Memorial Church. They paid for 7 demarcation stones in the area, the most famous one probably at Hellfire Corner. And when you look at the cost of those at the time, they equate to about £19,000 each in today's money. So they paid for 7 of those. There's a plaque, for example, up in St. Martin's Cathedral, partly funded again by the Ypres League. So it had a massive, massive impact here at that time in the area. And one of the motivations really for not reforming, but starting a new organisation based upon that is really not to let that legacy slip. Because, as I say, all of these things that the League have done really now go underneath the radar, if you will. And, you know, they've put in so much work over the years here in the 20s and 30s and raised so much money to do this. They had all sorts of things for their members, for example. They had the quarterly magazine, the Ypres Times, which you guys can find on the internet, or, you know, you can buy the actual volumes now, been reprinted. They're a fascinating read. They produce badges, ties, blazer badges. They even produced a certificate. Now, the certificate was only available to any men who had served in the Salient, and it became quite a sought-after document. And I'm just going to show you guys a picture. So can you see that, Paul? Yeah. So this was issued out to all the membership. But as I say, you had to be either an ex-veteran of the Salient or a family member of somebody who fell in the Salient itself. And when you look at the membership or the people involved you know, in the early days of the league. You know, if you can name a First World War personality, if you will, I'm going to read out to you guys some of the names of the people involved, okay, in terms of the original board, for example. The patron-in-chief, the King, the Prince of Wales, Princess of Beatrice were assistant patrons. The President, Field Marshal French, Sir John French. Vice Presidents, Earl Haig, Lord Plumer, Viscount Allenby, Viscount Burnham. And when you start looking down the committee members, Lord Byng of Vimy, Lord Horn, Lord Rawlinson, and it just goes on and on and on in terms of these people who you would recognise as, you know, ex-generals or generals of the time. Even later on in the existence of the league, Sir Fabian Ware, you know, heads up the War Graves Commission, is responsible for forming the War Graves Commission, was on the committee, as was Tubby Clayton from Talbot House. So it was a huge organisation at the time. So this all really came about, the new Ypres League. First of all, for my own personal reasons, which is I'm very conscious that I'm lucky to live here and do what I do for a living. Okay, I love my job. I love doing what I do, meeting the people, you know, and trying to keep alive the stories, you know, of the First World War. But I'm also very conscious of the fact I take a living out of it. So I've always been very keen to put something back. So I don't know, maybe some of you guys will know me, but I was chairman of the British Legion branch here, 2014, 2016. That's a year we projected the poppy on the tower of the Cloth Hall, for example. We had some concerts with British Army bands, for example. We had an exposition of the history of the Legion. So we were quite active, you know, at that point. But I'm quite a creative person. So I always found the Legion, important though it is, quite restrictive in terms of regulation. So I really wanted to form something myself. And as I say, but keep this idea of putting something back into the salient. Another issue is, and it's a hard thing to say, but you look at the ages now of organisations here and the key people involved here as well. And bless them, when you look at the standard bearers here who attend the ceremonies, for example, you know, lots of these guys are veterans from years ago. And we're now coming to a point in their life where they're struggling really to walk the distance, for example, from the Belgian War Memorial, even to the Menin Gate. And my fear is that in 10 years' time, for example, 5-10 years' time, there'll be nobody left doing this. So I really wanted to get something together to inject, you know, something new into the area and something people that can get behind and focus on. We also, as the Ypres League did, the Ypres League produced or recruited for a youth organisation. So we would like to look at that, maybe trying to have a youth organisation part, you know, of the new Ypres League to get, you know, younger people involved. But of course, this all takes management. It takes time. It takes money as well. So, you know, we really want to keep the memory of the league alive, but also we looked at in terms of how we believed the league would have evolved if the Second World War hadn't have happened. And we kind of think that the league probably would evolve to be more inclusive, because by the end of its existence, you know, it had agreed to honour Belgian soldiers, for example, not just soldiers of the Empire. So Belgian soldiers were now available or able to join the Ypres League. And we kind of think that was how it would have progressed. So we were very keen at the time not just to replicate things in terms of the Ypres League, in terms of, you know, their badges and whatever, but we wanted to base things upon it. So the old Ypres League badge, can you guys see that? Yeah, looks like this. Okay. So there's a lot of symbolism here in terms of the Ypres League. Now, the Ypres League, they focused heavily actually on the First Battle of Ypres as one of the most important battles, because basically this is when the Germans are stopped. So the Ypres League themselves, they describe Ypres as being the gateway to the Channel ports. Hence why you have on the badge, you can see here the portcullis. So the portcullis represents the gateway, Ypres being the gateway to the Channel ports. And the line, of course, well, it has two functions really. The line of Flanders, but primarily the line of the Empire, guarding that gate, stopping, you know, any attackers getting through to the Channel ports. So that was the league's logo, if you will. So what we've done, or what I've done, is produced a new logo based upon the old one. I've got a bigger version here. Just bear with me, guys. So this is the new logo. So based upon the old one, but just a little bit more modern. We've already produced some badges, some pin badges, which the museum's actually been very supportive of in terms of purchasing these. So that's given us a head start in terms of. Can you guys see that? So they'll be available for sale as well. But it's not just about commemoration, because commemoration is a very, very, very big part of what we want to do. So one of the main costs at the minute is looking for or having a standard produced, because the Ypres League themselves had, of course, their own standard, which interestingly enough went missing. So we're now in the kind of throes of trying to track that down. I'm going to show you guys a picture. If any of you guys have ever come across this, I'd be very interested to know. So this is a picture of the old Ypres League standard. Now, to give you an idea of the importance of the Ypres League, they would parade this at the Cenotaph in London on Armistice Day. Quite often, for example, Princess Beatrice would lay the wreath on behalf of the Ypres League on Armistice Day at the Cenotaph. But this basically has disappeared. Now, the league itself finishes actually officially in about the 1960s, and it carried on in London. It finishes here in Ypres in the Second World War when the British community evacuate. But it carries on into the 1960s in London. Now, excuse me. So one of the things we want to do is trying to see if that standard still exists somewhere. We've got no idea. We've contacted Eton Memorial School, for example, because of their links. They haven't got it. My personal feeling is if it still exists somewhere, it may well be, in a small church somewhere hanging off a wall. So one of the things we're going to do is kind of like do a social media appeal to try and track that down, if we can as well. Another thing we plan to do is regards to the demarcation stones. Okay, so getting away now from the commemoration side of it, because we will attend burials for soldiers. Okay, we've already registered with the JCCC. We're already receiving invites to official ceremonies. So once we've already attended some burials a few weeks ago, or rededications, where the Ypres League laid wreaths for the first time. And as I say, once we've got the money together and for the standard, we'll be attending ceremonies, with a proper standard based on the old one. And this is the design we've kind of come up with. Yeah. So very similar to the badge, of course. So we're going to be, as I say, also, we plan to commemorate certain dates, very certain dates, which were important to everybody, but also important to the Ypres League as well. And as Princess Beatrice was one of the founder patrons of the Ypres League, her son, Prince Maurice of Battenberg, was the only member of the royal family to be killed in the First World War that I'm aware of. And he's buried just outside here in Ypres Town Cemetery. And it's because of his death that Princess Beatrice was so active in terms of the Ypres League. Now, he's killed on the 27th of October, 1914. He was a lieutenant in the King's Royal Rifle Corps. So we plan to lay a wreath on the anniversary of his death. The Ypres League also had their own official day of commemoration called Ypres Day, in effect. So it's the 31st of October. So they would commemorate Ypres Day on the 31st of October, dated from 1914. And the reason they chose that date is because that's when the Germans were held at Hillyveld, just up the road on the Menin Road. So the Ypres League always classed that as a a momentous, if you will, occasion. We also plan, of course, to commemorate, of course, Armistice Day. So we were getting ourselves registered so we can lay a wreath underneath the gate on November the 11th, and smaller ceremonies as well. For example, if there's a ceremony for a certain regiment or whatever, we'll make sure we attend. So there's always attendance here if we can with a standard and a wreath as well. So that's kind of the official commemoration side. But we're going to also look at the historical side as well. Now, one of my pet things is demarcation stones. And going around the area, the demarcation stones now, some of them now are starting to get quite weathered. They're in poor condition. But they're not even sitting straight now. On the one on the near Patasa is kind of at an angle like this. So they're all protected by law, though, by Flemish Heritage. So what we want to do is contact Flemish Heritage. First things first is to get them cleaned up. Okay. I would like also to try and encourage Flemish heritage, and maybe we can part fund it as well, to get some of the stones recut slightly, because all of the engravings now, I mean, even the one at Hellfire Corner, the helmet of the British helmet at the top, you know, it's heavily weathered now. So it'd be nice to get a definition back. So we're looking at maybe doing that as well. One of the most interesting things we want to do, though, is the league placed 7 of these demarcation stones, you know, a huge cost to themselves, you know, just under £20,000 in each in today's terms. One of them went missing during the Second World War, the one at Wiltshire near Oxford Road Cemetery. Now, the local kind of story is the Germans took it and it was taken away to Germany. I've been told there's a photograph that exists of the Germans loading it onto the back of a lorry. But to be honest, that hasn't really come to light. I've never seen that. And, you know, with local stories as well, is it true? Is it not? Did it end up in a ditch or whatever? It would be great if we could track it down. A local historian here seems to think it ended up in what was then East Germany after the Second World War, but we know no more than that. I mean, of course, the odds are, of course, it didn't survive. And if that is the case, what we would like to do then is raise money to get it replaced. So to get a version of the demarcation stone recut and then put back in its place where the original one was. So that will be quite a nice, you know, a nice project to focus on and to do. With Dominic's help as well, with Dominic Dendoven at the Flanders Field Museum, we're also looking at putting out an appeal for artifacts to be returned to Ypres. Because during the First World War, of course, many soldiers here came through the ruins of Ypres, would pick up a piece of old wood or whatever from the cathedral or the cloth hall and would take it home as a souvenir. And to them, of course, at that point in history, it meant everything. And also to their siblings as well, you know, it's dads or whatever. But to the next generations now, it's kind of a bit of old wood in a kitchen drawer or whatever. These things are starting to be thrown away because they've got no kind of meaning to the next generation. So we would kind of like to put out an appeal to see if anybody has any of these things, and rather than throw them away, are they willing to send them back to, you know, to their home, back to Ypres? So that's another kind of project, you know, we're looking at doing as well. The last thing I want to do also, and this, to be quite honest, it's a fundraising thing, because to do all of this, of course, we need money. Even laying wreaths, you know, as an organisation, every time we lay a wreath at a ceremony, it costs us €30. So, you know, we need a fund for wreath laying. One of the things we're partly self-funding as well. You know, we've been out raising money, selling badges and that kind of thing. But what I thought I might do, and I really would kind of value people's opinion on this, is to reproduce the certificate, which I showed you guys, you know, the Ypres League certificate, and then sell those, and then for a fee, post those out to families who can say, well, my great-granddad fought here in the Ypres Salient. And again, we can personalise them. We can put, you know, Private Johnson on there from the King's Royal Rifle Corps or whatever, and then send it out to the families, and that'll be a nice memento, you know, for them to have. So I think that would be quite a nice way of raising funds, I think, for the league as well. So basically, it's in its early days. We've had a lot of interest already from people. I have to say, it's been very positive. The response we've got, which I'm really, really happy about. And there's been quite a few, if you would say, I don't know, First World War personalities or whatever, have been very positive towards it as well. So I'm going to kind of put it back to you guys now, in terms of giving you a bit of an overview in terms of what we want to do. So I'll just be open to any questions for a start. Over to you, Paul.
Thank you, Roger. I mean, I think it's a fascinating kind of idea and a fascinating project that kind of promises quite a lot there, and it's really good. I mean, like you said, the kind of Ypres League did a lot to kind of put in that infrastructure, didn't it, in that kind of interwar period that we kind of inherited when we first went to the battlefield and didn't really know of kind of the involvement of the Ypres League. And I only ever came across it by picking up the odd copy of the Ypres Times when they were, you know, rare as hen's teeth. So it's good that A, they've been reprinted, and B, that you're kind of taking that forward. And the certificate idea, I think, is great. I think that would be superb. A lot of people, I'm sure, would love the chance of that, because they're beautiful documents in their own rights, aren't they? So that's great. So what we'll do, if anyone would like to kind of ask any questions about this, and I'm sure one or two of you might also have a question for Roger about some of his books, if you've been dying to ask the author. But obviously, we'll kind of start, if that's okay, with anything about the Ypres League. So we'll do what we normally do, is you got a reactions button at the bottom of your panel there. You can click on it, as I'm about to do, and oh, okay. So they've changed that now. I know. There we go. Raise hand. There we go. Raise hands. Oh, someone's done that. I'll raise my hand, and then there we are. So I'll lower my hand now. So someone's got that. So if you want to ask a question, click on the reactions button, click raise hand, and then we can see you kind of come up in the slot at the top there. So Anthony, over to you if you'd like to ask a question.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks very much for that, Roger. Just give me a thumbs up that you can actually hear me, because it's all a bit
Yep.
dodgy at this end.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I had a great uncle killed in the salient. So I'm just interested to know what do organisations like Commonwealth War Graves think about this?
Oh, I've had meetings with the area manager of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission. They're very happy with it, because one of the things we decided to do also is to use their wreaths in terms of burials in the cemeteries, because now they're producing a wreath which is biodegradable. So we kind of said to them, in the short term, until maybe other options come available, we would use their wreaths. So yeah, the actual existing organisations are already comfortable with it. I've also had meetings with the Last Post Association as well. The War Graves Commission here, heads of museums here as well. The mayor's assistants here, some of the Burgermeister here. So everybody here is fine with it, because at the end of the day, we're not in competition with anybody. We're running parallel with, and it reflects also how the Legion were with the Ypres League in the 1920s and 30s, because of course the Ypres League is there first, then the Legion is formed, but they run in parallel with each other. They're running side by side. So what we will find also is membership of one is also membership of the other. So I've still retained, of course, my membership of the Legion, for example. So I'm quite happy to go out and help poppy collect, which I love doing underneath the Menin Gate, during the armistice period. So there seems to be, everybody seems to be very, very positive towards it. It's going to be interesting to see how it all progresses. But as it stands at the minute, everybody's very happy because they see it as a positive thing for the area.
Great, thanks for that. Because I've got a personal connection, I've been there quite a few times myself. You can count me in. I'll put my email in the chat.
Okay, thank you very much. What I'll do, guys, before we go, I'll give you the website address as well, because there's more information on the website as well, and we're going to add to it as we go, so you can monitor things via the website, and of course contact us through the website as well. So bear with me a bit, because it's all kind of at the minute full on, if you see what I mean. But the next thing we want to do with the website is get the certificate thing, organised. The web address actually is quite simple. It's www.newypresleague.com. Ypres as in YPRES.
Somebody's actually put that into the chat. So if you're looking at chat, if you're watching this, if you go into the chat, Gary's put that, very kindly put that in there. And you can see that. And I'll also tweet that after this is over, so that so you can find that address. So yeah, a couple of people have asked, is there a website? Can they join on the website? Is it a membership thing, or
yeah,
is
well,
it...
at the minute, in the short term, no. Okay, how we're going to do it is like sponsors, because once you start getting into the realms of membership, if we start getting large amounts of members, then you've got to start going down the route of quarterly newsletters and this kind of thing, which we haven't got the manpower at the minute to do. It will come, but in the short term, we're just looking at people who want to be sponsors, maybe make a small donation, buy a badge or whatever, but become part of it. And then maybe further down the line, we will look at a membership basis in terms of. But the thing is, in terms of membership organisations, you look at the Western Front Association. That's what they do really well. And this is kind of not the thing I want to kind of replicate. It's something slightly different where everybody's part of it. Your sponsors or whatever, or just want to, just to tag along. But we're going to try and do relevant things in the salient, as opposed just to commemoration, which important though it is, but we want to leave our mark here as well in terms of improving some things here as well. I should mention also, one of the things, add-on things we want to do is to put some information boards in place as well, particularly at the demarcation stone at Hellfire Corner, because there's nothing there really to commemorate the fact it was Hellfire Corner. And we can tie it in quite nicely with a demarcation stone, the history of the Ypres League, and of course the history of Hellfire Corner. So there's going to be some more add-ons, as we progress and we go through. But the great thing is the town themselves seem to be very positive towards it at the moment.
That's really good, Roger. And I remember that that the Ypres League put up kind of almost like signboards in different places, didn't they? So there was one to the South Downs battalions of the Royal Sussex at St Julien, which disappeared sometime in World War II. And I believe there's one there now to some regiment called the Hertfordshire Regiment, but in Sussex we only know the Iron Regiment, the Sussex Regiment. So it'd be nice to see that kind of back in, and I'd be very happy to kind of help fundraise for something like that. Because
come across any of those signs though?
I've never seen one. No.
I can only think they were burned by the locals or something like that after the war or whatever for firewood or what, I don't know, but I've never seen one, never seen an example of one.
No, I mean, even in the kind of various versions of the Shear family kind of museums with Hill 62, and then his uncle who inherited the other half of the collection that was on the Menin Road for a while, and then at Hill 60, and I think most of that ended up at Zonnebeek afterwards, didn't it? I think in the end, but I've never even seen one in there. There used to be a guy in Zillebeek, actually. I don't know if you've ever come across Henri Brame. Yeah, I don't know whether he might kind of know about some of those kind of things, because he was ancient when I first met him a long time ago. So
it's World War II stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But he seemed to be kind of a font of all knowledge, really, of those kind of things. So, and I think, like I said to you, we were talking. I was talking to Roger about demarcation stones, and we did an episode about Bayernwald, Krunart Wood, and the old soldiers' canteen run by Meister Beckart in there back in the kind of 70s and 80s. He had a demarcation stone in his collection. So, but I don't know where that was from. So, and you thought it might
an interesting one, because you imagine the weight of those things.
Yeah,
Moving that,
yeah. And you thought it might be one from Kemmel, maybe, but
only because that was the region where he was. It's not out of the realms of reality, but it wasn't the Germans who took it, and it was loaded on the back of a lorry and taken somewhere else.
Yeah. Where that went to, though, I don't know, because his collection was broken into and a lot of it was thieved. So maybe another lorry turned up to take that one away.
Yeah, maybe so.
There's a series of lorries in the past going round and round picking up demarcation stones, but it'd be good to kind of see some of this stuff back. And you're right about the condition of some of these stones. I mean, the one at Hellfire Corner some years ago, some very well-meaning, I'm sure, but slightly over-ambitious British people welded with lead some plaque to it, which did a lot of damage to the surface of the stone. So someone is, what is a demarcation stone? So this is in the chat thing. If you zip up in the chat there, you'll find that Grant has put a picture of one. I don't know if you've got one there. I haven't. There we go. There's some pictures of them. So they're often called Vautier stones after the man who designed them. And they're what was there, like about 200, I think, Roger, weren't there?
Yeah, spread across the Western Front. Yeah. A few disappeared during World War II. The ones in Belgium in particular, the Germans ground off apparently the inscriptions, because it read basically, "Here the invader was brought to a standstill," which we didn't like, so they ground those off. But they basically, it depends actually in certain sectors. But the ones here in Ypres were placed to mark the furthest point of the German advance in 1918. To be honest, actually, a lot of them are in the wrong place. They were like the Hellfire Corner one. Actually, is in the right place. It should be further up the Menin Road, but it is where it is. And to be honest, in terms of placing today, it's probably in its best place. You can see it. It's in a safe area for someone to go and have a look at. So we're not so much worried about the placement of them. They're not far off. It's the fact of the condition.
Yeah, and I saw there was a project to map them all. I can't remember. There's not 200 left, is there? Because quite a few
No.
disappeared. And I think Carl is on tonight, who saw the one that's shaved in half with a tank shell down in the Champagne.
Really?
Yeah, took the helmet, French helmet off the top of it. And it's kind of sitting there with this kind of shaved in half demarcation stone. that one might take a lot more work to kind of repair, I think, but it's not in the salient, so you don't have to
Yeah,
worry.
luckily it's under our remit. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, fascinating. Has anyone else got any kind of questions they want to tip in, or maybe about Roger's books? Kath, over to you.
Evening, Roger. Thanks for a really interesting talk. I've heard about the. Are you on social media? Because that's how you get people's attention these days.
That's the next step, Catherine. We're just getting the website up and running. And then the next step's going to be Instagram and then Facebook. I mean, I announced it on my own Facebook page, but we want to get, as you say, it makes sense to get the page up and running about the Ypres League itself. So yeah, that's next on the list.
Great, thank you. Thanks. It's just I'm aware that I'm president of our League of Nurses, and we get far more hits on our social media than we ever do on our website. So
yeah, is any particular social media platform? Or?
Facebook is our main thing. We haven't gone as far as Insta yet.
Right.
You know, the average age is about 75. The fact I've got them on Facebook's an actual miracle in itself. So
Roger, I would recommend is a very demographic based thing, okay? And Instagram is the biggest platform at the moment in terms of hits.
it is,
okay.
Across a broad spectrum.
Brilliant. Yeah, thank you guys.
Insta it is. Thank you, Roger.
Neil Russell has just made an interesting point on there, which I think is a good one. Neil says, all in good time and recognising you have a lot on your plate at the moment, Roger, but a lovely reprint of the book Beatrice Bryce wrote for the League in the style that Richard Fisher has done recently of the Vickers machine gun collection books would be a good way to raise funds in the future.
Do you know what? Has that not been redone, reprinted already?
Pen and Sword did an edition of it, I think, but I think the rights of it now have expired, which is how they were able to reprint it.
Okay. Yeah, so I've got a copy of the Immortal Salient. I've got actually signed by Beatrice Bryce, which is a nice thing. Yeah, that's a good idea to reproduce that. So I'll make a note of that.
And she did a few odd. There's one she did called Pass Guard at Ypres. Is that the one, or was it? It was kind of a play, I think, that she wrote.
Okay.
That I've got somewhere that was published by the Vanguard 1914. Neil says, yeah, that sounds about right. There was something, because in the back of the magazines it listed all the bits they used to sell. So over the years I've tried to pick them up, not always successfully, I hasten to add, but yeah. And then someone has asked, Brian says, are the Western Front Association on board?
Yes, we've contacted the Western Front Association. And we've also sent them some releases to be printed in the magazine. So in terms of being on board, well, they've not said officially that they're sponsors or whatever, but they're going to put the information in the magazine. So I kind of say yes, because we've had nothing negative back from them.
Brilliant.
So I won't say officially that they are, because, that's not the correct thing to do, but they're definitely very receptive towards it.
And then Philip Walker says, shall mention this to our members' Western Front meeting next week. So that's good.
Yes, yeah.
And then Anthony Pittman, I don't know if you want to kind of come in. Oh, you're back in. Sorry, I didn't realise that was you back in.
I was saying, Roger, I don't know how much you know about the War Memorials Trust.
No, go on.
Okay, they're quite I don't want to use the word affluent, but they're quite well set up, and they give grants for the restoration of war memorials. In fact, for anyone's information, because they're not very well known in anywhere in your local church, village, or whatever. They will adjudicate over the validity of it, etc., and then they'll give you a grant if you make the cut, and those grants can be pretty generous. Okay, I'm not sure that demarcation zones fall into the right category, but I bet there's a bunch of other regimental memorials dotted around the salient that may well do with a bit of work.
Yeah.
So look them up, the War Memorials Trust. I do some work for them, so by all means you can tap me up for some inside info if you want.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I've made a note of that. I'll have a look on the internet and see. Yeah, the only thing that we might come up against is the fact that we're non-UK based.
I don't think that matters.
Oh, good. Okay.
I did some stuff for them in Alamein.
Right. Oh, okay. Was that on the Alamein Memorial to the Missing? Oh, I've got a relative on there. Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant. Cool. Does anyone else like to kind of pitch in with any questions? I mean, this is your opportunity to ask Roger about Langemarck and the aftermath in the salient. One little thing about Langemarck, I don't know if you've come across any more on that, Roger. Remember we spoke about the Langemarck massacre.
Well, the AI. Yeah.
Yeah. So the kind of backstory to this for everyone here is that I've been experimenting with AI, not literally experimenting, but but I've been looking at kind of is AI a potential tool for kind of research into the First World War, for example, which will possibly become a podcast at some point or other episode. And I was asking it a number of questions, and it flagged up this story of the Langemarck massacre, which it said was a massacre of British troops by Germans in Langemarck Cemetery on a specific date. I think it was about the 26th of April, wasn't it, in 1918?
Yeah.
And when I asked what its source was, it flagged up books like Barbara Tuchman's The Guns of August and John Terrain's The Western Front and really A.G.P. Taylor's History of the First World War, none of which mentioned the Langemarck massacre, because we're pretty sure, I think, Roger, it never happened.
No. What we think was the AI had kind of cherry picked bits of information and cobbled it all together and put together a completely incorrect narrative, basically. Because if you remember, when we're talking about a massacre, first of all, they were talking about, was it 3 soldiers?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of think that's kind of maybe tying back to the Private Carlisle, Private Lockley, plaque, because they do mention there's a plaque to the massacre in the cemetery.
Mm.
The massacre itself, well, of course, that probably goes back to the Kindermord. So I kind of think it's just cobbled stuff together and came up with this narrative, which ironically is the reason why I wrote the book. Because that cemetery has been subject to so many myths over the years. And as we kind of know, if you keep repeating things often enough, particularly on the internet, they start to become kind of pseudo facts. So the danger with AI now is, of course, you start going to generate more myths.
So you've dealt with the human myths of Langemarck. Now you've got to deal with the artificial intelligence myths of Langemarck. It's a whole new book in its own right.
It'll be definitely another chapter, I think. Yeah.
Extraordinary. So a few more questions popping up in the chat section. Is Roger planning any more books, as his first 2 are excellent? That's from Peter.
Thank you, Peter. That's very kind. I've got 1 or 2 ideas, but at the minute, everything writing-wise is on hold. I'm focusing at the moment in the coming months on the new Ypres League. But I will write again, yes. Yeah, I've got a couple of ideas.
Brilliant. And Bruce Gilbert says, I'd be interested to hear what the Reclaiming the Salient is about, if Roger could give a brief summary.
Yeah, it's all about, 2 subjects, really, which it came about through the tours. There's 2 subjects which fascinate people on the tours and myself. First of all, the ammunition recoveries here, because they still recover here on average every year about 250 tons a year of unexploded munitions from the First World War. So part of Reclaiming the Salient is about how the battlefields were cleared of the munitions and the accidents, what have happened from the 1920s up to the present day. And part of it also, of that section, is how the Dovo, the Belgian Army bomb disposal units, deal with it. So writing the book was fantastic for me, because it meant I had 2 days out with the Belgian Army. So I had 1 day ammunition collecting, going around at a safe distance, of course, and then 1 day at their depot in Houtholst, looking at how they dispose of the chemical weapons, and traditional munitions as well, like high explosives. So that's the first part of the book. The second part of the book is all about the body recoveries. Because at the end of the First World War, when the British Army gives up and goes home at the end of the 1920s, there's still tens of thousands of bodies here, laying unrecovered. There's stories of tourists, wives, mothers, girlfriends coming on tours, touring the area, and there's still bodies laying above ground. So it's a story really of how the battlefields were cleared of the bodies, how they were dealt with at the time. There's an interesting chapter on body snatching, for example, where families couldn't accept repatriation, so they physically, or they employed people to come and physically take the bodies away in the dead of night. There's an interesting section also on the Hooger Crater Cemetery inquiry, with the mistakes made there, for example, by the early Labour Corps. And it goes right through to the present day in terms of how bodies are recovered today, how they try and identify them, and of course the reburial process as well. So it's basically split into two halves: ammunition recoveries and body recoveries. For me personally, it was a fascinating book to write. It was one of those ones where it just kept flowing nicely, because the subject for me is a fascinating one.
There's some absolutely brilliant and compelling stories in there, and we've got quite a few comments about how good your books are, Roger, so that's really nice to see. Christina asks, I find myself wondering what was the original impulse that made you passionate about the First World War. Your work and dedication is fascinating and very much needed. And she says, I'm sorry for my bad English, but it doesn't sound that bad to me. So,
well, the impulse is like yours, Paul, I think, is the old British comic Charlie's War, which I won't ask you guys, but I'm 56. So when I'm growing up in the 1970s, all of the kids' comics in the UK, they weren't like Marvel comics or anything. They were all World War II based stories. But there was one called Battle or Battle Action, and it produced a comic strip called Charlie's War, about a British soldier called Charlie born in the trenches. But the artwork was really, really graphic in terms of the mud, the bodies and whatever. So yeah, it had me hooked. So that really got me into the First World War at the age of 10. Read all Quiet on the Western Front at quite an early age as well, and never looked back really. But it was fate as I ended up here doing this. But I'm a lucky man to be able to do what I do.
Yeah, here. Philip says, Reclaiming the Salient is such a fantastic book, an untapped area of the Great War. Greatly appreciated you wrote it, he says.
Thank you very much.
And Helen and Dave say, can't stop thinking about the shell that fell off the flatbed truck and killed the family working in the field.
Yeah. There's a whole host of stories in the book of terrible accidents involving children, for example, and some unlucky stuff as well. Piece of shrapnel flying through the air and hitting somebody a couple of 100 meters away, But yeah, it's there's some tragic stories there, put it that way. Yeah.
And Neil Pudney says, agree that Reclaiming the Salient is a fantastic book. Had the pleasure to review it for the Great War Group, so hopefully boosted the sales even more.
Thank you very much, Neil.
Good. And I guess you're going to be speaking to them as well about advertising what you're doing.
Yeah, we've contacted as many people as we can, of organisations of like-minded people, because many people are members of the same organisations. They overlap and whatever. So yeah, we're contacting as many organisations as we can.
Brilliant. John Thompson says, hi, Roger. Whilst doing your research for Reclaiming the Salient, was there any stories or facts that shocked you?
I'll tell you what actually shocked me the most, funny enough, is not individual stories, but the portrayal of those stories. Because when you started reading the Belgian press at the time, they didn't pull any punches whatsoever in terms of how they describe the incidents. They would describe a body being disemboweled and found on fire 30 meters away from the explosion site.
Wow.
So yeah, that was very graphic. So yeah, that was kind of one of the things that shocked me. And of course, the other thing that shocked me, I suppose, really is how many bodies were still missing when basically, the armies go home, and how many bodies were still unaccounted for here. And you kind of wonder, had the army stayed on for another 5 years or whatever, how many more bodies would be identified? Because these were specialist teams, these guys. These guys knew exactly what they were doing. And when they were all disbanded, all those skills were lost. So you do wonder how many more men would have been buried as identified soldiers as opposed to unknowns.
Interesting. Steve says, I've sent you an email. It's from Steve Head. Roger, I've sent you an email via the new Ypres League webpage, offering my help where I can. And quite a few people have asked about buying the badges. Can you do that via the website?
Yeah, if people just send me an email with an address on, and I'll reply personally, and we'll sort that out. Yeah, we've got badges, so that's no problem.
Brilliant. And they're on sale in Flanders Fields Museum.
Yeah, Flanders Field Museum, Passchendaele Museum, where else? Talbot House. So if any guys are over and they want a badge, you know, they can buy them from the museum shops as well.
Brilliant. That's really good news. So people need to keep an eye on the website. We'll put a link up to that onto social media as well. Quite a few people have put the link in the chat box if you want it straight away. And I'm hoping that you and Mark Connolly, who I know is very heavily involved in this from what you've said, will come on the podcast, talk a bit more about it in the next month or so.
Yeah, that'd be interesting because Mark knows the history of the old Ypres League inside out. And that'll be an interesting podcast to do, you know, in terms of the original stuff and how it kind of progresses into what we're trying to do now. So yeah, we look forward to doing that.
Brilliant. No, brilliant. Thanks for giving us your time, Roger. Is anyone else who would like to ask a question? Nope. Okie doke. Well, thanks for your time. Thanks for your time, Roger. Really appreciate it. We're going to keep it kind of short and sweet tonight because we're taking up a good hour of your time. So thanks for that. We'll keep everyone kind of informed and keep an eye out on the podcast, everyone, and you'll see an episode with Roger and Professor Mark Connolly talking about the Ypres League sometime in the next month or so. I think we're just about coming towards the end of season 6. So it might be early season 7, something like that, but it will be fairly soon. There's not going to be a big gap between seasons or anything like that. At least I don't think so anyway. So let me just do that, and then we're back to normal. I'm just going to stop recording, so I remember to do that. Got to find a button for it now.